I'm also going to pause. Right then, well, I can see we've got a few participants on, so welcome to our first Social Farms and Gardens webinar. This is the first one we've run, so thank you to those of you that had a number of emails from me this morning and yesterday with the link. We're just working out kind of technical problems with booking and getting everyone in, so I hope that you've all been able to join, and if anybody drops out kind of partway through, there's any connection issues, you should be able to rejoin. So I'm Sophie and I work for Social Farms and Gardens, and I've worked for us for about 5 years. I'm going to take us through a bit of housekeeping, how the call is going to work, and then sort of any kind of follow-on information at the end. So I'm just really topping and tailing today. And then also on the call are Heidi and Angie. Heidi's kind of going to be helping out behind the scenes, and Angie's going to be talking you through the really, like, the meat of the stuff that we're going through today, basically. So yes, you will see all of us. Okay. Why does it skip forward? There we go. So yeah, today's webinar is on budgets and cash flow. And we put this webinar together really because we're aware through the survey that we did with our members that one of the big issues that's come out of the kind of crisis that we find ourselves in at the moment is that an awful lot of groups and projects of all different kinds have experienced a real sudden loss of income. And that's been, as you would imagine, hugely problematic. And so finding sources of funding is one of the biggest kind of urgent needs that members have at the moment. So many are sort of starting to look at grant funders that they might not have considered before, or might not have gone for grant funding before. And one of the requirements of that is often that you submit a budget and a cash flow forecast along with those funding applications, and that's something that people often struggle with. So we wanted to just put this quite short webinar together just to show people how to go about that. Okay. In terms of this webinar, so a webinar is different to a normal Zoom call for some of you that would have gone through those. So all attendees, you guys, are muted and we can't see you. So it's a little bit strange in that we can't see or hear you, but we know you're there. So I feel like I'm talking to myself. If you do want to speak to us, please use the Q&A function, which should just be in the kind of Zoom control bar to submit questions. Once I've stopped speaking, I will then go on to looking at those Q&As, and I'll either get back to you during the webinar, or there'll be a little bit of time at the end once Angie's finished her kind of presentation. So I'll collate any questions that come in, and then I can put them to her towards the end. So please do use that if there's specific things that it would be helpful for you to know. Also, please use that if you need to flag up that you're having a technical problem, and then we'll do our best to help you. We are kind of learning on this call, so thanks for bearing with us. I think there is also a chat function. So that will enable you to speak with other attendees. So if whilst we're speaking, you think of a particularly useful resource or something like that, you can just put that into the chat, and other attendees will be able to see that. I think in the chat function there is an option to say whether you want to share it with all attendees or just with us, with the panelists. So if you're trying to put something out there to everyone, please do just make sure you select other attendees. Just to say that for that reason, when people have questions, what we won't be doing is sort of putting your video up on screen. We'll just take questions through the Q&A function, just because that means that we don't have to go through lots of kind of permissions internally. We'd love to see your faces, frankly. So if you get kicked out for any reason or your internet goes down, the link that you've had, you'll be able to click that and rejoin so long as the webinar is still taking place. Okay, I'll talk about the forthcoming webinars at the end. I am going to stop sharing my screen now and hand you over to Angie. So I will mute myself.
Hi, I'm Angie. I'm the finance manager for Social Farms and Gardens. I've worked here or there for about nearly 7 years. Started in a support role, and I've moved into the finance manager role over the last 3 or 4 years. So what I want to apologise, because my family has been making an awful lot of noise in the background. Normally they're just on the Xbox or something, but they just need to time to join us. So I apologise if there's any background noise. What I'm going to do very quickly is take you through creating a budget, just a basic budget, and putting that information into a cash flow, so that you are able to do that for any budget applications or funding applications that you do. Then what we will do at the end is I'll show you one that's with an empty one to show you some of the stuff that needs to be in it, and then I'll show you a completed one for both, so and talk you through what they should look like at the end. What we can do at the end as well, that it's useful for people, is send you out examples that we've worked with and the spreadsheets that I use and our staff use to create budgets for their projects. So, can everyone hear me? Somebody's just said they're having problems hearing.
Yeah, I think there's some audio issues. You were sounding completely fine when we tested this earlier, and yeah, now you're sounding quite crackly.
Okay, fine. It says speaker is not working. Check your connection or use a different speaker.
The only thing I can suggest is to try and come out and come in again, because when we had this, when we tested this, it was working fine.
Yeah.
And I could hear you. And actually, I can hear you fine now.
Okay. Do you want to wave to me if it starts being a problem?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody said that's better. Okay. So just to summarise, I'm going to take you through an empty draft, how to prepare a budget, how to prepare a cash flow, and then we show you one that's been completed already so that you can see what it should look like at the end. Okay, I'm just going to give a couple of definitions. So, a budget basically is where you look at what income, normally done over a year period, basically look at what income and what expenditure you have in that time, and you should aim to have enough income showing to cover all of your costs. So you should either break even or make a surplus. Now, the difference between a budget and a cash flow is looking at when money is going to come in and out of your bank account. So it's a way. Is it still not working? Yeah, okay, fine. I'll carry on. So it's a way of looking at, you starting with the amount of money you have in your bank account at the beginning of the period, and then by looking at what money comes in each month and when grants are going to come in, or when you have other cash coming into the bank, and then the commitments that you've got every month to going out, and then what the balance is. And sometimes what the aim of what it is to do is to identify pinch points potentially in the year where you might have a shortfall of money. So you might know that you've got money coming in December, for example, but you've got a lot of expenditure over the summer, and then you end up with looking like you've not got enough, you won't have enough money in for October, November, December. It just gives you a way of planning, or trying to plan around those kind of issues. And also it helps funders know what kind of, what your overall operating ability is. You may know that cash flow is the main thing that causes businesses to go under. It isn't that they're not profitable. It isn't that they can't deliver what they need to deliver. It's just that they don't necessarily have enough cash in the bank to be able to pay staff or pay suppliers, and that means that they then go out of business. This happened a lot to larger organisations, in fact multinationals, but it can also happen particularly to small ones. So what I'll do is just take you through now. I'm going to share my screen and take you through. Oh, hang on a minute. Where is it? Here it is. take you through a budget, creating a budget. So basically what I've got is an empty budget done on on Excel. Excel is great because it enables you to calculate everything and double check everything. I've done a really simple one, obviously, and I've done it on a basis of a year. Obviously, for more complicated or for bigger organisations, you might need a more complicated one, and I'm happy to do a separate session or to talk people through how to do that if that's useful at some later date. So basically, let's start with the income. So let's say we have a council grant of £10,000 that we know is coming in the year. We've got another grant from a trust, a local trust, of 5,500. This is set up to give you a total income at the bottom. Visitor donations, okay, so we know we get £100 a week. So then you can either say it equals £100 a week times by 52 weeks in the year, and that gives you your 5,200, and so on. So you'll end up, and then plant sales, gift aid, whatever other income sources you know you have in your organisation. So then you're looking at expenditure. So I've broken it down into staff costs, direct project costs, office costs, and then project governance and management, or organisation governance and management. For staff costs are normally, for most organisations, the largest cost that you have, unless you're all voluntary, in which case it may be materials that are your biggest costs. But if you're calculating staff costs, it's I've got a salary calculator here which I use. I'll show you. So basically, it works out the different roles, the different so you put in the full-time rates. This one is set up to calculate all of these things automatically. But I can talk through how to do that and how to calculate that if anybody needs that at a later date. But basically, so say we've got a coordinator role of half-time, which is 0.5 full-time equivalent. We put 0.5 in there, and then it works out that the salary costs for that is 12,500, which is half of your 25,000 full-time rate. Your employer's national insurance, there's a particular calculation for that, so it's set up to work that out. And then obviously, as an employer, you have to pay pension, a minimum of 3%, and that, so it works that out as well. And then the total cost for that role are 13,388. So I'm going to put that into my, I've set it up already to automatically pull through. So you do that for all the roles. So you've got salary costs there. Then then if we look at just direct training, direct project costs, what you think your training events are going to cost. So let's say we do one a month and they each cost £200. So you've got 12 months times £200, and so on. And you work out the costs in that way. I always have a notes column because quite often you go back into a budget and you can't really work out how you've worked out what your costs are going to be. So it's useful to have some notes to say this is based on these particular costs, or these assumptions and these workings. So that's for, so then obviously things like equipment and materials, publicity and advertising, any kind of direct staff costs or non-staff costs. So if you're paying a consultant or a freelance person to do a particular piece of work, put that in this cost in that section. Office costs, those are all obviously basic. You'll know what your office costs are for based on last year's probably, and if not, those things are all available from invoices, previous invoices and things, and there are, you know, I do them based on our previous and then add a little bit for inflation. And then board meetings and any legal advice or contingency costs. So what I'm going to do now is show you the full budget that I'd already filled in. Let me just make that a bit bigger for you. So we've got, so it just shows where I've got all that, some information from. So what I've done is said there's still to raise there, and for example, so if you're going for an Awards for All bid, you might include that in the budget as part of your committed costs, as a way of showing. So this is an organisational budget. Obviously, if you're doing a budget specifically for the Awards for All, you would break down what you're applying for from them only. But this is an organisational budget in case your funder wants to see that. And then, oh, hang on, it hasn't pulled through all the stuff. So then we've got all the other costs, heat and light, and total expenditure. I've also in this broken down the monthly cost, broken down the annual cost by month, because that helps when you're filling out the cash flow forecast. So what I'm going to do here is, hang on, I'm just going to put in the rest of the salaries so that it pulls everything through. So we've got 0.5 there and 0.4 there.
Angie, just while you do that, can I just ask for the people that are participating in the webinar, could you just give me an idea through either the chat or the Q&A, how many of you are reasonably comfortable with using Excel or do already use Excel? Just to sort of give us an idea. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes. There are obviously simpler ways of doing Excel. The things I've set up you need a certain level of knowledge on, but there are ways you can use it in a more simple way, and we can help with show that as well. Okay, so this is the cash flow. Now this is similar to what, for example, the National Lottery are asking for Awards for All grant applications. It looks a bit scary, but it is quite logical when you break it down. So essentially what it is, I've done it over the year. It's always done by month because it's about how much money you have at the end of each month. Basically what I always do and what I do for ours as a charity is I list all the specific bits of income that I know we have coming in. So I would always have the same categories of income or lists of income as you have on your budget. So if we go to the budget here, you can see we've got council grant, other income, visitor donations, and so on. And so we've got the same ones here, and then possibly additional funding to be secured at the bottom if that's if your budget has a shortfall, you know you need to bring in. And then likewise, I have the same categories for expenditure as you have on your budget. It just helps when you're filling it in to know that you've got the right information in it. So I'm going to pull through, put some, right, so what you need is total income at the top and then total expenditure for each month at the bottom. So that those total income on line 18 and then total expenditure for each month on line 43. Then you've got monthly surplus and deficit, and that means if your income in a month is 5,000 but your expenditure is 8,000, that doesn't matter so long as you're starting with some money in the bank. And obviously it does matter if you don't have money in the bank. So one of the key things is this, what I've highlighted in yellow here, is the opening cash balance. And that is how much money, so if you're starting your cash flow from the 1st of April or from the 1st of May, it's how much money you have in the bank at the end of the previous month, or how much you start with in the bank. So let's say we start in the bank with £5,000. So that gives us the figure. All of this is set up, and whatever cash flow you have to fill out will be set up like this. So you don't need to worry about the individual calculations. There are various ones. I think the National Lottery or the Lottery for Awards for All, they have a format one that they use, so that you can download it and use that. fill that out if for their applications. So I just add in a few things. So let's say we have the council grant coming in May. So we put that in there. So that shows your total income in May is 10,000. We've got visitor donations, which we know is £100 a week. So on average, it'll be about £450 a month. And then what we can do is copy that across. There's a simple way of doing that, which is just to put it across. So I'll do that. And then you've got your different trusts. Maybe one comes in September, and another one comes in we know is coming in November. So that's how you put in your income. And then obviously you need your expenditure. So then I'm going to take you back to the budget with the monthly expenditure, and then we know that every month our manager costs are 1,116. So we can put, or our total salary costs are 2,796. So I'm going to go to the empty cash flow and I'm going to put that in there, and so on with all the other individual costs that we put in. Now there are some costs which are only once a year. So insurance, that's generally once a year. If you have a major event in the summer, like open days, or you have 2 open days in a year, those, one in June and one in September, those sorts of things you'd have costs just that in that month. You wouldn't spread it out. But other costs, some of them are monthly, like phones and IT support and printing and that kind of thing. So it's basically a question of looking at when your costs are going to go out, as well as when your income is going to go out, come into the bank. What I'm going to do now, rather than fill this out anymore, is just take you to the completed cash flow, so that you can see the total income, total receipts here, the total on the bottom, this bottom line here. I don't know if you can see when I'm highlighting it. 40, that's over the total year is 45,900 income, and that matches the budget. So if we go back up to here, we've got all of the different levels of income, and we've got the total amount, and it matches, but this just breaks it down about when it's actually coming into the bank. Then we've got all the costs, likewise. So some of them are monthly, some of them, like other events here, I've put in as just twice a year. Other ones like insurance, where's that further down here? Insurance there, just a one-off payment in June. Purchasing a laptop, one-off payment in September, and so on. And then quarterly board meetings, so it's got the costs of those as well. Obviously, these costs are just examples, and everybody's will be different, but the principle applies whatever size of project you are running. So let's just look at the bottom line, the bottom of this section of the cash flow. We started with 5,000 in the bank. That's the most important figure, and I would always highlight that because it really affects how everything else in the cash flow moves on. So you really need to be clear, and it's obviously the bank balance at the end of the previous month. Then the most important thing is the closing cash balance. Sorry, I've just said the most important is the opening. To start with, it's the opening cash balance, but then what you're wanting to look at is the closing cash balance. So here we can see on the first month, at the end of April, we have got £2,000 in the bank, and that is made up of the £5,000 at the beginning that we started with. We've got £1,000 of income that month, so that takes us to £6,000 of income available to spend, and then we're spending £3,000, 4,000, nearly £4,000 in that first month. So the balance then is £6,000 less £4,000, which gives you the £2,000 left in the account. As you move across, you can see the different levels and where there are pinch points. So we know initially there's a pinch point in May, because we've got less income coming in. There are no grants coming in May, but we've still got commitments in terms of salaries and other office costs and running costs. So it's about then looking at how you can manage that, either trying to get more income in, move money from a savings account, and that kind of thing. That's the reason I've shown that as a negative there, just because it helps you. It's all about enabling you to plan and to make changes to what's going out. If there's anything you don't have to pay out that month, you could delay it until the following month when you know that you've got a £10,000 council grant in. So that's how a cash flow works. Obviously, then in June you end up with £5,000 in the bank, and then in July 6,000, and so on. And actually, at the end of the year, you've got, because you're making a small surplus on your budget, according to the budget. Obviously, this needs to be reviewed regularly. There's your small surplus, and it's just going back to the cash flow. You end up with a closing cash balance of 5,344, and that is your 5,000 that was in the bank to start with, and then your surplus of 344. Obviously, it's never ever going to finish exactly in that way. It's not and you need to review cash flows on a regular basis. We review ours, and so we know when there are pinch points, and we know when we're going to have to possibly look at trying to make sure we delay payments where we can, or ask funders if it's possible to get a payment earlier, that kind of thing, so that we don't ever go below zero in our bank account. So those are the main things. I think probably there's not much else I can add to this without questions. So if anyone's got questions that they want to ask, or clarifications, things that I've not explained very clearly, or that I've done too fast, because I'm aware might all just be financial speak.
Thanks, Angie. Somebody has just submitted a question asking how often is good practice to review the cash flow?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I do ours probably quarterly, but I will do it more often if I know that there are going to be issues with, if we're kind of looking at, if we've got a very small amount in our bank or something. So, for example, we have a situation where some of our bigger funders, they pay retrospectively. So that means we do all the work, we make all the payments, and then we claim the money once we've done the work. Some of our grants are paid in advance, and obviously that helps with cash flow. But we do have a situation quite often, because our grants, one of our major grants is paid quarterly, that we get to the end of the quarter, so at the end of June, for example, and we've spent out a lot of money that we won't get back until July. And those are the points at which I know we might have issues. So, and if there are times when we have a couple of months when I think we won't have very much in the account, then I'll review that on a more regular basis. But generally, I would say quarterly is probably a good practice. Most financial years run from April to March. So looking at the end of June, the end of September, December, and then the end of March.
Okay, great. If other people do have questions, what I'm going to suggest is that if you're happy to say the questions just over the audio, what I can do is, if you use the raise your hand function, and then I can just unmute your microphone. We won't be able to see you, but you'd be able to just explain what your question is. even if that's just sort of something to do with clarifying what some of the terms mean, or a more detailed question. Or if you don't want to do that, then you can submit something through the Q&A, and then I'll put it to Angie on your behalf. Or if you have no questions and everything's just amazingly clear.
or yes, what we will do is send this out so that you have it, you can play with it and use it, and then come back, you know, if there's anything that you want clarification on at a later date.
Okay, so I've got a question, Angie, just asking about loans, and if loans sort of are a feature for us.
For us?
So the question says, do loans feature in our world? But yes, I suppose for us, and then like how might loans fit into the documents that you've shown us?
Yeah, okay, so that would also show as, so as a charity, we haven't had to take out any loans. We have managed to operate without that. We do have some reserves, which all charities are supposed to have, and we use our reserves as to help our cash flow. So so that means we don't generally keep very much money in deposit accounts, because we are having to use it to pay for the charity to run. The difficulty with loans would sit within this, and the way it would work, where you would put it if you did get a loan, would be, so say you took out a loan in June of, I don't know, £5,000 or something. Obviously then you've got commitments in terms of the money being paid back. So it would show as £5,000 in June. It would increase your balance in your bank at the end of June. But then you would have to show the payments going out each month to repay that loan. And that would depend on the period and how much each monthly repayment would be. The issue, so in a way, I suppose a loan is the same as an overdraft in terms of the cash flow. It operates the same as an overdraft, because effectively an overdraft is giving you an additional cash sum, although you wouldn't necessarily show it as income. It would just mean that you could go into a deficit in your closing cash balance, because the money is available from the bank. The issue with loans, obviously, is that you need to know that you can repay it, and that's fine if you just need an immediate cash injection. And obviously, a lot of small businesses operate like that. So, but it is a risk, and it's something that, as a charity, you'd have to be or as a non-profit organisation, you have to be careful about the decision making and about who actually is liable for that if anything went wrong.
Okay, great, thank you. So there's another question around dealing with expenditure for projects that will only occur like if funding's received. So I guess sort of budgeting.
Oh, okay, yeah, yes. So kind of so ones that you that don't actually impact on your cash on your budget. So they're kind of additional projects, aren't they? They're new projects. So yes, to deal with those on the budget and include them in your budget, you might need a slightly more complicated budget with different columns in it. So as well, so like confirmed budget, confirmed income and confirmed expenditure, and then additional income and expenditure that has not yet been confirmed, and where it doesn't have an impact on what you're delivering currently. It's just additional work and additional expenditure. We have our budget has about 20 columns which have all the different projects that we work in it, and that it's a relatively complicated spreadsheet, but it does help in terms of seeing what's committed, what you know is actually going to go out, and what would be additional work and additional income if it came in.
So
that might be for a different session, or I could talk directly to that person if they.
Would that mean that if you've got sort of a number of different projects that are maybe being funded by different people, you might have like a main, like mother budget for the entire organisation, but
Yes.
they might have additional budgets, small like these, but on a smaller basis, that would then feed into that overall budget?
Yeah, so that's how I would do it, because obviously, so it does depend on how the grant is made and what the grant's made for as well, because quite often a grant will be given to you for a very specific set of costs. So for example, the council might give you your £10,000 here, but it's specifically for your 2 open days, your towards the development worker role, but only a part of that development worker role, and then towards some of your office costs, for example. So you would then need to have a budget specifically for that. Now, there are two things. One is having us just doing this type of budget for that particular big grant. So if you did that, if you took out all of those other costs there and just had that £10,000 as your income, it would still be relevant to have all your individual costs against that 10,000. But for example, development worker role there would only be like £5,000, and the events would be the £1,600, and then I don't know, £500 towards office costs, and that would be your budget for that particular piece of income. And so some funders will require they'll require to see your overall organisational budget, just so that they know what kind of level that you're operating at. But they will also, and they may be happy to contribute a bit towards the overall budget, or they may want to see exactly what their element is paying for. So if you're putting in an awards for all bid, for example, for 8,500, you would need to know what that 8,500 is paying for, and you'd need to be able to tell them that. And you can still use this kind of budget format for that. It's just this is presented as for a whole organisation, so it just be it's a partial budget.
And just in terms of like looking at it, and sorry if this is a stupid question, it's not one that I'm asking. Is there a way that you use to display what money has been definitely achieved, like what funding is confirmed, and what is still what you might have put applications in for but you haven't had a decision on yet?
Yeah. So then I would need you'd use different columns. That's how I do that. So you would have, so you should, when you start the year, you should have a plan, I suppose, about what commitments you've got in terms of particularly staff costs, which, as we said before, are the biggest costs, and how you're going to meet them. And so obviously you don't want to be then spending more money than you actually know that you're going to be getting in. So if you know you've got half of your 20,000, ideally you're not sure about the rest of it. Ideally you're not spending you're not using all of that money in 6 months, just in case some of it doesn't come in. But so budgeting is really, when you get to that kind of level, it's quite complicated. And then it's about forecasting as well, which is another section to this really, and isn't really dealt with in this initial budget preparation.
Somebody's asked if you might be able to just go through briefly about having reserves. So whether reserves are held in a separate account, what a sort of sensible percentage is to sort of help maintain a healthy cash flow.
Okay, so the Charity Commission has guidance for all charities about how much reserves you should hold. And essentially the guidance is for up to 6 months of operating costs. So monthly operating costs for this budget here for this organisation is a month is 3,700. So 6 months is going to be, hang on a minute, let me just work that out. It's going to be about 22,000, 23,000, so half of the total budget. Now that is an ideal, and not many charities manage to hold a whole 6 months of reserves. We hold about 3 months of reserves. Reserves are quite difficult to build up as a charity unless you have generated income. So if you're making money from plant sales and things like that, that means that's free money that you can keep in your bank account if you don't need to spend it. But if you've got grants that have to be spent, you aren't allowed to just keep, you're not allowed to just spend less of it and keep the rest of it in your bank account. So it's quite a tricky thing to build up, but essentially up to 6 months is the recommended. If you've got more than that as a charity, more than 6 months of reserves, the Charity Commission kind of frowns upon it because it's public money and it's supposed to be for public benefit. So you should have plans in place so if you're holding huge amounts of cash, you need to have plans in place to spend it for your charitable aims, I suppose, towards your charitable aims.
And I suppose that wouldn't necessarily apply, because a lot of members won't be charities, but the same kind of guidance might apply, but that kind of regulation by the Charity Commission wouldn't be relevant, but it's still kind of not necessarily good practice.
Yeah, and I mean, not many small organisations at all will have big cash reserves anyway. It would be very unusual unless you've received a massive legacy donation or someone's left you some money in a will or something like that. But generally speaking, it is, the same principle applies whatever size you are, and it's to enable you, so that enables cash flow, and it enables if there's any kind of unforeseen expenditure that you might have to make. And we hold in our reserves, we hold a sum for redundancy for our central services staff, who, just in case the charity had to close, it's that kind of thing that you're holding money for, just in case of emergency, effectively.
And just to sort of follow on from that, my understanding is that reserves aren't typically held in a separate bank account. It's all in the same bank account, but you just you're accounting for that money within your kind of overall budget.
Yes, that's right. So it's this is the difference between an income and expenditure, and then the balance sheet. So we hold all of we used to hold our reserves when most grants were paid in advance. We held our reserves in deposit accounts, so it was generating interest for us. But now we're not in a position to be able to do that because we have to use it in order to operate the charity on a monthly basis, as to help our cash flow. So it's not in it is in the same bank account. Effectively, it comes in and goes out. But when we present our accounts at the end of the year, so when you present your balance sheet at the end of the year, which is how much money you are holding as a charity, how much money you owe as a charity to suppliers, how much money other people owe to you at a particular point in time, that's when you would show your level of reserves. So that would be part of your overall, the value of the charity or the organisation at the end of the year.
Okay. Great, thank you. Thanks for the question. There is a subsidiary question from the same person, and I feel this might be a too big a subject, but it's around budgeting for potential income tax.
Right, so that would be if you are income tax.
So the question is it worth budgeting for income that might have to pay tax on, that you might have to pay tax on?
Right, so that depends on the type of organisation that you are. As a charity, if you are a charity, you don't have to pay income tax necessarily.
The person that's posing the question is a CIC.
Is a CIC, right? Okay. So yes, you need to include. So the when you do your end of year accounts, you would need to work out how much tax was owed, and then you'd need to hold that amount. So that depends on your surplus and your profit basically in the year. Yeah, and you'd need to hold that money so that you're able to pay that tax liability at a later date.
Okay, super. Right, that's all of the questions that people have submitted. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to throw in? Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's all of them. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Angie. A few people have asked whether the sheet will be that Angie's been going through will be made available, and the answer is yes, it is. So I'm going to be emailing that round to everyone after the call. I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen, if that is okay, Angie.
Yeah, fine.
Steal it somehow.
Shall I close mine? I'll stop sharing.
I can do that.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Carry on here. Yes, so I'm going to send around the sheet that Angie went through immediately after the call. So please do sort of test that out and see how it works for you. The thing that I wanted to flag was that we have just relaunched our Social Farms and Gardens group for members. So this is different to our like organisational, can't say it, page where we kind of send lots of things to you. This is very much a space for you. So I'd really invite you, if you use Facebook, to join that group. And then if you have questions sort of following on from today's call, or there's stuff that you want to ask other members about how they use their budgets, then that might be a good place to kind of pose questions, or even talk to the other people that have been on this call to kind of share like questions or how you found it. And then also just to say that we're happy to run kind of a follow-up session to this once you've been able to have a bit of a play with the sheets that I'm going to send round. So yeah, keep in touch, and if that's something that you think would be particularly useful, then let us know and we'll see what we can get scheduled. Okay, so that's that. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight that we do have a few other webinars that are coming up, and we will be scheduling some more in addition to this. So please kind of keep an eye out for what we've got coming up. So we've got another one tomorrow where we'll be hearing about kind of how people have had to adapt their working practices quite rapidly to deal with social distancing and how they're working with vulnerable people within those constraints. Then we've got another few that are very much focused on different elements of securing funding. So looking at writing funding bid, finding funders in the first place and approaching them. And then we also have a session with a lottery funding officer, and that's on the next Wednesday. So she will be going through how the lottery has revised their funding criteria in light of COVID-19. So if you are thinking about a lottery grant, I'd really recommend joining that one. That will be particularly useful. And we also have a sort of more general discussion from a number of people within the sector about kind of challenges that we're all facing at the moment and how it might impact us on a kind of day-to-day working basis, and also more generally moving forward into the future. So yeah, those are coming up. Please let me know. I'm just going to check. There's another question that's come through. Yes, and so somebody's asked about the webinars, whether they are being recorded. Yes, today's has been recorded, and I will be attempting to upload it onto our YouTube channel, which will be a first for me. So assuming that works okay, then yes, all the webinars will be recorded, and they will be available online if you're not able to make the webinars live. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Angie, is that all good from you?
Yeah, I was just thinking while we were just talking about that, I will just, before you send it round, I'll just update I'll just make a couple of changes to the pages that that you're going to send around, or the spreadsheets, and to include an example of a project budget, not just an organisational budget. So I'll take one of those funding bits and then break it down to what costs you might apply to for a particular project, so that there's another page, and then you can send it around after that.
Brilliant. And I will also send round a link to where you can find the list of the webinars that we've got so far, and just to say that as we get more scheduled, they'll be added to that web page, and we'll also be putting out information through our social media channels. So keep in touch, basically. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And is there any more questions? No. Okay, right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. That is the end of our first webinar. I'm glad we survived. Angie, thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. There's been
well, hopefully it's been
saying that it was really helpful. So yeah, really appreciate it. Okay, right. Thanks everybody for joining us, and I'm going to end the call here.